Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Monday, everybody. I hope you had a restful weekend and have a productive week ahead. Tomorrow, Tuesday, thousands of delegates from all over China will descend on Beijing for the opening session of the National People's Congress, part of the so-called Lianghui, or 2 sessions, what some call China's rubber stamp parliament. During this event, People's Republic of China Premier Li Qiang will deliver the government work report for the first time in this role, and it's likely that in this speech China will announce its 2024 growth target and outline its strategy for supporting the slowing economy, which is grappling with deflation, an ongoing property crisis, mounting debt burden, and foreign capital exodus. Investors will closely scrutinize policy priorities and stimulus signals from this report. We will cover it in detail as well as the relevant commentaries after it's released. Many outlets are speculating on what the report will set as goals in policy this year, but speculation is just that. So it's best to just wait a day or so to cover the actual report, the implications and the reactions. For today, we have an economy-heavy episode, and first up, what we do know is that China's vast manufacturing sector remained in contraction for a 5th consecutive month in February, underscoring the difficulties facing the country's leadership as it moves into the National People's Congress. Over the weekend, the National Bureau of Statistics published China's official factory numbers. The country's manufacturing PMI stood at 49.1 in February, slipping from a reading of 49.2 in January. A reading below 50 marks a contraction from the previous month. However, a survey by the Caixin S&P Global released just after the official PMI showed manufacturing activity expanded steadily as both production and new orders grew faster. If we can take these together, it would suggest that the PMIs highlighted an uneven economic recovery at best. Larry Hu, chief China economist at Macquarie Group, in a note to clients expressed over the weekend, quote, "Overall, both production and consumption data for February suggest that both corporates and consumers stay cautious," end quote. The same day as the PMI releases, new numbers from the China Real Estate Information Corp found that China's 100 largest developers saw new home sales fall to another record low in February, with the total sales falling 60% from a year earlier. This is a 21% drop from January. We note, however, that the timing of the 8-day Lunar New Year holiday has some impact on this. While we're on housing, over the weekend China's housing ministry said more than 200 billion yuan, $28 billion of bank loans have been approved for property projects. Quote, "The latest indication that lenders are heeding the government's push to support the embattled real estate market," end quote, in the words of UK-based The Financial Times. The Housing Ministry said that commercial banks had approved that amount as of the 28th of February. US-based outlet Bloomberg reports that this is a jump from about 29 billion yuan as of the 20th of February. About 6,000 projects are now included on the whitelists that make them eligible for housing support. The outlet explains that policymakers have increased pressure on banks to boost property loans through whitelists as developers contend with a years-long debt crisis that is making it hard to complete projects. As we have just seen, however, so far this has done little to arrest the property slump. Property agency China Index Holdings, in a note published today, observed that the housing watchdog has had 2 internal meetings with major players in the industry within 10 days to speed up implementation of bank loans that have been approved for property projects, quote, "underscoring regulatory urgency," end quote. Next up, the end of the Chinese consumer. But just quickly, if you enjoyed today's episode, I have a huge favor to ask. That is just to like and subscribe. This is the only way the channel can grow and is a huge help. And Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Next up for the economy, over the weekend, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin published a special piece on the state of household wealth. The report is very frank and makes fairly shocking conclusions about the end of the traditional Chinese consumer, something Beijing will not want to hear. The piece reports, citing a survey by the People's Bank of China, that the average total assets of urban households before the pandemic in 2019 stood at 3.18 million yuan, $442,000, with housing accounting for 59.1% of the total, financial assets 20.4%, and businesses, cars and other physical assets the rest. The average annual disposable income for urban residents in 2019 was 42,400 yuan, quote, constituting merely 1.3% of their wealth, end quote. That means, for a typical urban dweller in China, the piece explains, housing and financial assets account for 80% of the total wealth, and therefore, quote, the value of these two assets significantly influences consumers' self-perception of wealth, end quote. The Caixin authors then argue that the recent macroeconomic changes in China have had a substantial impact on consumer wealth. The value of real estate and financial assets has contracted. Of course, regular viewers know that we've been following both of these, housing and the stock market, very closely. The combined decline in real estate and financial assets has significantly reduced residents' wealth, far exceeding the slowdown in actual income growth. Specifically, compared with the 2021 peak in housing prices, urban residential second-hand housing prices has fallen by 9.1% by the end of 2023, quote, affecting residents' wealth equivalent to over 4 years of savings, end quote. The decline in wealth is even more pronounced in areas with greater declines in housing prices. Regarding financial assets, quote, the Shanghai Composite Index, a barometer for equity assets, not only halved from its 2015 peak, but also fell by a quarter from its September 2021 high, causing an average loss of 94,000 yuan per active account, equivalent to 1.82 times the 2023 average annual disposable income of urban residents, end quote. The piece also explores transformations of consumer behavior, arguing that shifts in income expectations inevitably leads to changes in consumer behavior. Among people in the low-income, middle-class and affluent groups, those planning to maintain or reduce their consumption over the coming 12 months reached 55%, 67% and 52% respectively, according to a May 2023 survey. Quote, this startling trend indicates not a relative deterioration in the spending power of individual groups, but a comprehensive contraction across all demographics in expectations for future income and consequent expenditure. Evidently, the capability, willingness, extent, and nature of consumption have all undergone significant changes. We arrive at a clear conclusion: the traditional consumer has vanished, end quote. The outlet continues, quote, by the definition of income, the middle class has not diminished. Instead, it is still set to grow. Yet, in the 4 years since the start of the pandemic, the Chinese consumer, once full of hope for the future, expecting ever-increasing income and equating higher consumption with a superior lifestyle, has disappeared, end quote. Chen Long, former president of Luohan Academy, a think tank under Alibaba Group Holdings Limited, and the dean of the Lakeside University Innovation Research Center, writing on this very trend also over the weekend, argues that Chinese consumers have redefined themselves, expressing, quote, the substantial shock to income and future expectations has forced individuals to rethink the meaning and value of what they spend their money on, eventually reflecting in their choice of consumption mix. For businesses mired in inertia, this transition entails the painful loss of original consumers, declining revenue and profits, and a sense of helplessness and anticipation toward macroeconomic trends, end quote. However, he does add that savvy businesses will see commercial opportunities in this consumption shift. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Monday, and I will see you all tomorrow.